our last video on the heart-stopping collision near Scarborough Shoal, you already know the South China Sea has become a high-stakes arena. Well, guess what? Things just got even hotter. Overnight, China's military shocked the world with a jaw-dropping statement that's sending shivers through Manila, Washington, and every household that cares about peace in the West Philippine Sea. Beijing is boasting that it drove away a U.S. destroyer that sailed close to Scarborough Shoal, the very same area we talked about last time, where Filipino vessels are constantly being harassed. That's right, China is painting the U.S. Navy's presence as a provocation, while the Americans are hitting back saying, "We were just asserting freedom of navigation, and nothing China says will stop us." Now pause for a second. This isn't just another routine naval back and forth. This marks the first U.S. operation near the shoal in 6 years. That means Washington deliberately chose Scarborough, a place that symbolizes Filipino sovereignty struggles, to send Beijing a message. And Beijing? They answered with fire in their words, branding it as an intrusion. And remember that terrifying collision we reported just days ago, when a Chinese vessel rushed dangerously in front of a warship and ended up crashing? Analysts are saying this wasn't just bad seamanship, it's part of Beijing's gray zone tactics, testing how far they can go before triggering something bigger. And the scary part? This time it wasn't just a Coast Guard boat. It was a Type 052D destroyer, one of China's prized war machines, damaged, out of action. Proof that playing chicken in contested waters can backfire spectacularly. But it doesn't stop there. Manila has confirmed that a Chinese fighter jet intercepted a Philippine Coast Guard plane flying over the same shoal. For 20 tense minutes, the Chinese jet shadowed the Filipino aircraft, flying as close as 200 feet. That's basically the distance of a basketball court. Over the radio, Chinese warships barked threats. "Leave immediately. You have entered Chinese territory." Can you imagine the pressure our Filipino pilots felt at that moment? Let's put this into perspective. Nearly $3 trillion worth of trade passes through the South China Sea every single year. Every clash, every intercept, every warning isn't just about lines on a map. It's about global shipping, food on tables, gas in cars, and the very security of our nations. For Filipinos, it's about dignity and sovereignty. For the US, it's about keeping the seas open. For China, it's about power. And so here we are, Scarborough Shoal, once again, at the center of global attention. A flashpoint where the world's superpowers are eyeball to eyeball. The question is, how much longer can this dangerous game continue before someone blinks? Or worse, before someone doesn't? Stick with me, because in the next part we'll break down Manila's response, Washington's countermeasures, and what experts are predicting for the months ahead. Trust me, you don't want to miss what comes next. Now, before we dive deeper, let's step back for a moment, because to really understand why Scarborough Shoal is so explosive, we need to look at the long, tense history of the South China Sea. For years, this has been the stage of David versus Goliath showdowns between the Philippines and China. Remember back in August 2024 at Sabina Shoal? Filipino resupply boats were blasted with water cannons and even rammed by Chinese Coast Guard vessels. Brave sailors came home soaked, injured, and furious, but they held the line. And who can forget the laser incident at 2nd Thomas Shoal in February 2023? Chinese ships aimed a military-grade green laser at a Philippine Coast Guard vessel, temporarily blinding our crew. It looked like something out of a movie, but it was deadly serious. A hostile act that sent shockwaves through Manila and Washington. Then came the June 2024 armed standoff, where clashes between Chinese and Filipino forces actually left people injured. That wasn't just posturing, that was real blood spilled over contested waters. So when we see today's fighter jet interceptions and destroyer collisions, it's not happening in a vacuum. This is the latest chapter in a very long, dangerous playbook. And here's another twist. Back in 2016, under President Duterte, the Philippines actually tried to cozy up to China, turning away from Washington in hopes of economic benefits and warmer ties. But fast forward to today, under President Marcos Jr., and things look completely different. Manila has swung back firmly into the camp of the US, Japan, and Australia, strengthening alliances and doubling down on defending our territorial rights. That shift in alignment has not gone unnoticed in Beijing, and every time a Chinese ship rams, lasers, or threatens, it's part of this bigger chess match. On August 11, the world saw a moment that Beijing would rather hide. Two Chinese government ships collided while chasing a Philippine Coast Guard vessel near Scarborough, Shoal. The video is crystal clear. One of the Chinese ships slammed so hard it suffered heavy damage. Yet Beijing is denying the crash ever happened, brushing it off as fabrication. For Filipinos, this wasn't just another clash at sea. It was proof that China's reckless pursuit tactics are spiraling out of control, endangering lives and making a mockery of its own power. Just 2 days later, on August 13, Beijing tried to flip the narrative. China's military proudly announced it had monitored and driven away the U.S. destroyer USS Higgins from Scarborough Shoal. This wasn't just any patrol, it was the first American operation at the Shoal in 6 years. Washington immediately rejected China's claim, saying the Higgins was conducting a lawful freedom of navigation patrol and that no amount of Chinese posturing would stop them from sailing in international waters. But China doubled down, condemning the U.S. presence as illegal and warning Washington to restrain its forces. It was Beijing's loudest signal yet that the Shoal is becoming a red line. As if that wasn't enough, President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. added fuel to the fire. Speaking in the same week, Marcos warned that if conflict erupted over Taiwan, the Philippines would inevitably be dragged in, kicking and screaming. He explained that geography and the 200,000 Filipino workers in Taiwan left Manila no choice.
If there is a confrontation over Taiwan between China and the United States, there is no way that the Philippines can stay out of it, simply because of our physical geographic location. To understand how close Taiwan is to the Philippines, the large city of Kaohsiung in Taiwan is a 40-minute flight away from the capital of my province in northern Philippines, in Lawag. That's how close it is. If you think about it, if there is all-out war, then we will be drawn into it. And I assure you with the greatest hesitation, but we will have to defend our territory and our sovereignty.
Beijing lashed back, accusing Marcos of playing with fire and trampling on its one China principle.
奉劝有关方面不要在台湾问题上挑衅，玩火者
Marcos quickly clarified that his words were twisted and misused as propaganda, but the damage was done.
Sinong Pinoy na gusto magkagera? Sino? Kahit maganap ka para sa akin, kahit isa. Kahit yung sundalo, kahit yung Coast Guard, ayaw nila ng gulo. No, but at the same time, we have a duty to perform, and that is to defend the country. So no, we never back down.
For many, it was the bluntest acknowledgement yet that the Philippines cannot stay on the sidelines if a Taiwan crisis explodes. And while these political and military barbs flew, action was already unfolding in Philippine waters. The Philippines and Australia launched Exercise Alon, the largest joint drills in their history. Around 3,600 personnel backed by destroyers, amphibious landings, and roaring FA-18 jets are training side by side. Observers from the US, Canada, and other allies lined the beaches, making it crystal clear that Manila is not standing alone. Australia's deployment of warships, marines, and fighter jets marked a powerful new phase of regional defense cooperation, a message to Beijing that every aggressive move will be met with greater unity. So in just 1 week, the world saw China's ships crash into each other, Beijing claimed it chased off an American destroyer, Marcos Jr. warned of being pulled into a Taiwan war, and thousands of allied troops staging live fire drills right on China's doorstep. Each development alone is headline-worthy. Together, they show just how close the Philippines now stands at the center of a storm that could shape the future of the entire Asia-Pacific. The clearest example of China's recklessness came on August 11th, when video cameras caught two of its own ships slamming into each other near Scarborough Shoal, one a Coast Guard vessel, the other a Navy ship. The footage showed sparks, metal grinding, and heavy damage, a dramatic moment that symbolized Beijing's dangerous gamble at sea. For Filipinos watching, it wasn't just a collision of steel, it was a collision of pride, proof that China's aggression can literally tear itself apart. Only 2 days later came the USS Higgins standoff. For the first time in 6 years, a U.S. destroyer sailed directly into Scarborough Shoal, challenging China's sweeping claims. Beijing declared it had driven the ship away, but Washington made it clear the Higgins was exercising its right to freedom of navigation, and it would not be deterred. That presence sent a message louder than words. The US is back in contested waters, and it's not leaving anytime soon. Then came the voice of President Ferdinand Marcos Jr., cutting through the noise with blunt honesty. War over Taiwan will drag the Philippines kicking and screaming into the conflict. We have to plan for it already. Those words, carried across headlines worldwide, acknowledge what many have feared but few dared to say, that our country cannot escape the storm if Taiwan ignites. Beijing quickly accused him of playing with fire, but Marcos refused to back down, exposing the propaganda game for what it was. And as if to underscore that the Philippines will not stand alone, the largest ever joint military exercise with Australia began almost simultaneously. Exercise Elan will run through August 29th, featuring amphibious operations, guided missile destroyers, FA-18 fighter jets, and thousands of troops storming beaches in simulated battles. Alongside them, multinational observers from the US, Japan, Canada, and beyond watched closely, turning the drill into a living display of solidarity. All of this points to a larger pattern. The Philippines' alliances are no longer tentative, they are deepening. Manila is working more closely not just with Washington, but also with Tokyo, Canberra, New Delhi, and even European partners, all united in countering Beijing's push. What was once an isolated struggle over reefs and shoals has become a global case study in how small nations and big allies confront expansionist power. President Marcos Jr. didn't mince words. Speaking about the Taiwan flashpoint, he said, "There is no way the Philippines can stay out of it. We will be drawn and dragged into that mess, kicking and screaming." That one line, blunt and almost resigned, revealed just how close the storm feels to Manila.
Beijing was furious. The Chinese Foreign Ministry snapped back, accusing Marcos of playing with fire. A sharp, almost threatening rebuke, meant to put the Philippines in its place, but instead, it only lit up headlines around the world, showing how raw and personal the rhetoric has become. At sea, the statements were just as fiery. After the USS Higgins sailed through Scarborough Shoal, China's PLA Southern Theater Command called it an illegal intrusion and bragged that they had driven away the American destroyer. The US, of course, flatly rejected that narrative, but the contrast of words revealed the standoff. Beijing painting itself as the gatekeeper, Washington refusing to be shut out. And on the front lines, Philippine General Romeo Bronner Jr. made it clear what was at stake. China's aggressive actions were very clear. We were there to protect Filipino fishermen. Simple, but powerful. For ordinary Filipinos, that's what this struggle is really about: defending livelihoods, protecting families, and holding ground against overwhelming odds. When we zoom out from the latest clashes, what we're really seeing is part of a bigger historical pattern. For more than a decade, Beijing has been testing boundaries in the West Philippine Sea with what analysts call hybrid maritime aggression, moves that fall short of open war, but push the line just far enough to intimidate. Think back to the laser attack in 2023 at 2nd Thomas Shoal, when Chinese vessels fired a blinding green beam at Filipino sailors, or the ramming and water cannon attacks in 2024 at Sabina Shoal, where resupply boats were nearly sunk. Each of these incidents, taken alone, might look like isolated confrontations, but stitched together, they form a timeline of escalation, a strategy designed to wear down Philippine resolve without triggering a full-blown military response. Foreign policy has also played its part in shaping the story.
During Rodrigo Duterte's presidency, Beijing thought it had finally found an opening. Duterte courted China, downplayed the West Philippine Sea ruling, and publicly distanced Manila from Washington. For a while, it looked like China had won influence over one of America's oldest allies in Asia. But the reality was different. Promised investments from Beijing never fully materialized. Internal mismanagement in Manila kept projects stalled, and Filipinos grew frustrated as harassment at sea continued. The pivot didn't hold. Enter Ferdinand Marcos Jr., and the tide turned sharply. Manila is once again leaning hard into its partnerships with the United States, Japan, and Australia, reviving joint drills, signing new defense pacts, and making it clear that the Philippines isn't going to stand alone against China anymore. That's where the idea of collective deterrence comes in. The ongoing exercise alone isn't just a military drill, it's a political signal. Thousands of Filipino and Australian troops storming beaches together with destroyers, FA-18 jets, and live-fire training sends a message Beijing can't ignore. Add to that the presence of observers from the US, Japan, and Canada, and you see the layers of a growing security network. It's not just Manila pushing back, it's a chorus of regional and global players coordinating to show China that its aggression has limits. This is the new strategic reality. small nations backed by alliances, using unity to balance against overwhelming force. Looking ahead, the stakes are massive. More than $3 trillion worth of trade passes through the South China Sea every year, along with nearly 40% of the world's liquefied natural gas supply. Whoever controls these waters doesn't just decide territorial boundaries, they shape the very arteries of global commerce. For the Philippines, this isn't an abstract fight. It's about sovereignty, fishing rights, and defending its exclusive economic zone from sweeping Chinese claims. The risk of escalation remains dangerously high. The August 2025 crash between two Chinese ships is only the latest in a chain of collisions, rammings, and water cannon incidents that stretch back years. Add to that close call air encounters, like when a Chinese fighter shadowed a Philippine patrol plane at just 200 feet, and it's clear that even a split-second miscalculation could trigger a crisis. Live fire drills by major powers in contested waters only heighten the chance of a flashpoint. Meanwhile, regional militaries are stepping up. The U.S. Navy has returned to Scarborough Shoal after 6 years, signaling a revived freedom of navigation campaign. Australia has committed heavily, launching Exercise Alon with the Philippines, bringing 3,600 troops, destroyers, FA-18 jets, and amphibious operations that will continue until August 29, 2025. Japan is boosting defense ties as well, providing radars and patrol vessels, while India and European partners deepen port calls and joint dialogues with Manila. Together, these moves show a growing security network designed to counter Beijing's assertiveness. Diplomatically, the space for compromise is shrinking. Beijing slammed Marcos Jr. for playing with fire after his Taiwan warning, while Washington and its allies insist that freedom of navigation under UNCLOS is non-negotiable. Within ASEAN, fault lines are widening. Vietnam and the Philippines push back hard against Chinese pressure, while states like Cambodia and Laos lean toward Beijing. This division makes collective regional action harder, even as external powers close ranks around Manila. The big questions now hover over the horizon. Will Beijing recalibrate, realizing that its aggressive tactics are driving neighbors into the arms of US-led alliances? Will the Philippines deepen its Western alignment further through expanded defense cooperation? And will ASEAN manage to hold together, or fracture under the weight of this tug-of-war between China and the Western Bloc? These choices will define not just the fate of the West Philippine Sea, but the balance of power across the entire Asia-Pacific. In the end, the West Philippine Sea is no longer just about shoals, reefs, or fishing grounds. It has become the front line of a global contest over power, law, and survival. Each clash at Scarborough, every close pass of a fighter jet, and every joint drill with allies is part of a much bigger picture, a struggle that carries consequences for sovereignty, alliances, and the free flow of over $3 trillion in global trade. For Filipinos, this fight is deeply personal. It's about protecting our seas, our fishermen, and our dignity as a nation. For Washington and its allies, it's about standing firm on the principle that international waters must remain free. And for Beijing, it's about proving that its rise cannot be stopped, even if it means pushing neighbors to the edge. The truth is, the future remains uncertain. More collisions could spark dangerous escalation. Regional militaries are showing sharper teeth, and diplomacy is narrowing as rhetoric hardens. Yet at the same time, alliances are thickening, and the Philippines is no longer standing alone. What happens next will decide not only the fate of the West Philippine Sea, but could ripple outward to shape the balance of power across all of Asia. And so the question we leave with tonight is this: will cooler heads prevail, or are we watching the opening moves of a storm that could redraw the map of the Pacific? If you liked the video, do not forget to like, share, and subscribe our channel for deep analysis of contemporary issues.